This is Pastor Bill from Park Place Church in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Today is Memorial Day, the day we honor those who gave up their lives in service to our country. When I think about Memorial Day, I remember men and women whom I know who served in World War II, those whom we have referred to as the greatest generation. But my mind also takes me back to the late 60s. I was a tour guide on the battleship Massachusetts in Fall River. The battleship is a war memorial honoring all those who served during World War II, as well as other wars throughout the years. Today, if you visit the ships retired from service, resting now in Battleship Cove in Fall River, they will give you a headset to listen to recorded messages, complete with sound effects, at each of the stops on the tour. But originally, they had hired a group of high school and college-age young people to guide people around the ship. And I was fortunate to be one of those chosen. To qualify as a guide, there was a lot of studying required, facts to memorize and stories about crew members that we had heard. And I must say, it was a fantastic job for a man planning to be an actor, and although he didn't know it at the time, a pastor sometime in the distant future. I could tell you about the 9 16-inch guns that fired a 2,700-pound projectile, and it could hit a target the size of a Volkswagen Beetle 20 miles away. The battleship was affectionately called Big Mamie because she never lost a man during combat. And if you've never been to visit the ship, I recommend it highly. And now if you visit, you can also see a destroyer, a submarine, and a few other naval vessels as well. Now the facts took a while to memorize, but eventually we mastered them. However, the most interesting and touching part of the tours were the real life stories of the men who served on the battleship. And working on the ship back in the 60s, serving as chief of maintenance and restoration, was a man who was a retired naval lieutenant. And he had served on the ship during the war. Lieutenant Green was a valuable resource for stories and facts that were not easily accessible in our studying. He knew every inch of that ship in detail, and he was meticulously devoted to its care and restoration. His excitement was contagious each time a new portion of the ship was scheduled to open to the public, and with each new section came more stories and memories that he had safely stored away from his time serving on the ship. I remember one summer day. I had been greeting guests and leading tours all day, and frankly, my feet were hot and tired. And Lieutenant Green came up to me and asked if I could stay later. He said they had a special group who had booked a dinner on the ship, a private party, and he wanted me to give them a tour. Lieutenant Green was someone you just couldn't say no to. He gave so much of himself, and so when he asked you to give, the only answer you could offer was, "Yes, sir, of course I can stay." I had a little bit of time before the group arrived, and so I went to the wardroom. That was a space once used as the officers' mess, or dining hall. I went there to get a drink, and the caterers were busily setting the room for the guests, as music from the 40s was softly playing. After a short break, I went back to the gangplank, or brow as it was called, to welcome our guests. And I watched as they made their way down the long dirt pathway from the parking lot to the ship. These men and women were about the same age as my mom and dad. And when they arrived at the top of the brow, each man stopped, saluted the flag that was flying behind me, and then he said, "Request permission to come aboard." And I responded each time with, "Request granted. Welcome aboard." Then I watched as the men moved through the ship, explaining different facts with the guests that they had brought with them, and sharing personal accounts of life on the ship. It was then that I realized this wasn't just any group of people. This was a reunion of men, of former crew members who had served on the ship during the war. Some walked somberly around the ship, lost in their own memories. And others acted like a bunch of Cub Scouts, like kids climbing on the 40mm anti-aircraft guns. It wasn't long before I heard Lieutenant Green's voice come over the loudspeaker announcing that Bill McMillan would be starting a tour of the main deck in about 10 minutes near the aft 16-inch gun turret. I remember thinking, what can I offer to these men? They served on the ship. They know more than I could ever know. But they were the most attentive and polite group I've ever had on a tour. At each stop, I shared what I knew, and then someone in the group would share additional information because it was the area of the ship where he had served. Oh, I learned so much that evening. And at the end of the tour, Lieutenant Green met us and explained that he would now lead everyone into the new memorial gallery of the ship, which had not yet been opened to the public. I hadn't even seen it yet, and he invited me to join them. He opened the hatch and we walked into a darkened room, cooled by new air conditioning. And hanging from the ceiling were large black and white photos of scenes from the ship and campaigns it had been on. And each photo was printed on large sheets of glass, which enabled viewers to see a reflection of themselves in the picture. The room was filled with a reverence I had never experienced before in my life. And as people walked through, stopping and looking at each picture, there were very quiet oohs and ahs throughout the room. And then one man somewhere in the crowd said with a voice just barely above a whisper, "We're the lucky ones. We came home." No one moved, his words hanging in the air. No one spoke. But as I watched heads bowed throughout the room, tears flowed, and the room was filled with a sense of gratitude to those who had given their last full measure in service to their country and in defense of freedom. This reunion took place 52 years ago. But when I stop and I remember, I can be right there. And I can experience all of it again. So please take some time today to share with others your own memories of those who have served. And may we remember with gratitude those who gave up everything to keep us safe. Pray with me. Gracious and loving God, thank you for memories, for events we've lived through, and for stories we've been told. May these thoughts shine forever, and may they return to our consciousness often. Especially at times like this, may we never forget your words. Greater love than this hath no man, than he lays down his life for his friends. Amen. Pastor Wayne will be with you tomorrow with his words and music, and I will see you back here again on Wednesday. Good day.